his TikTok dance moves later with us, I think.
So are there moves involved? Are there moves involved?
Yeah, I'd like to see it.
Okay.
I think we better get going because we have a lot of work to get through today in the time allotted. And a couple of things I just wanted to note beforehand. First of all, the team has posted all the minutes that we're meant to approve from our last 3 meetings, sort of the plenary from June and also recent video conferences for in between that plenary and this. I'd ask you to look at it. If there are no objections, I would also seek to approve that in tomorrow's session. So everyone's had a chance to review it before, people have commented on it. And so the idea is to make sure that the minutes faithfully reflect those meetings, and hopefully we could get through that tomorrow. So thank you to the team for doing that, and thank you for everyone who's commented. Today is round 2 on EER. Let me tell you, we have there's a lot of chapters, and there's a couple real big substantive issues, including on Supplement A and Diagram 5. Then the intent is to go through the chapters one by one, but we will never make it if we talk about drafting on specific paragraphs in terms of it would be clearer if that's the case, and you have that type of comment, I would ask you continue, just send those in writing. I really want to focus on issues of appropriateness of drafting, whether we've captured the materials, that the task force is responding to comments appropriately. So we're going to have to find that balance here if we're going to hope to go through it, and then the task force will take it up and speak to people afterwards as well. But it's just to get through the amount of material that we need to exert that discipline right now. Again, we're not approving a final document on this tonight. So, Lynn, I hope that sets you up properly for tonight's discussion or this morning. Hopefully you got some rest. We were a little bit later today, but sadly I knew that you were also in task force meetings for a certain other project you have responsibility for before this. So, Lynn.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody. Could we please move to slide number 8? And so we agreed that at the end of the last session, we'd take any high-level comments on Diagram 5. Diagram 5 was put together after phase 1 to try and bring everything together in one place so that people could understand the interrelationships. The feedback we got was very few people liked it, but a number of other people found it too complex. The task force isn't 100% sure what to do in terms of this diagram. The options we've thought of are to try and simplify it, to try and explain it, or to delete it. So just interested in not the content of the diagram, but any high-level input about what we should do with in terms of achieving the objective, which is for people to see the interrelationship between circumstances and preconditions and the quality management system. So back to you, Tom, for any comments.
Okay. I feel like we've talked about Diagram 5 once or twice before the years. Fiona?
Good morning, everybody. Look, I don't have a strong preference, Lynn. I would go with the task force view at the end of the day. I am mindful, though, that some people are more visual than others. So, if in doubt, maybe a diagram helps people, but I really don't have a strong preference one way or the other. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. Josephine?
Very similar to Fiona, Lynn, really with your view. Certainly if you can simplify it, then by all means go ahead. Clearly an electronic solution will help, but there were calls for it originally and people did think it was helpful. So at the end of the day, like Fiona, I don't mind whichever way you think is the most appropriate.
Great. Eric?
Ditto previous comments.
Way to heed coaching, Eric. Julie?
I'm in the same place, so keep it short.
Rich?
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Sorry, never to go with the flow. I never liked this, always thought it was convoluted. So agree with the respondents that it's convoluted. And so I would delete it.
Okay. The next person is Kaiue.
Thanks, Tom, and good evening. I agree with the task force proposal. As noted in paragraph 62 on diagram 5. However, I also believe that there are some technical difficulties with diagram 4, which suggests it might be better to replace that diagram with examples. Thanks.
Thank you. Imran?
Yes, Chairman, I've written to the task force about this. I think that we have two options available to us. One is a legend, which was absent from the consultation paper to this. And that may simplify it for some people. And the alternative was I pointed the task force back to one of the respondents, particularly the South African Institute, and their effort to design a new diagram for us, which was a lot more square and regular shaped, just for consideration again, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Sue?
I'm with the earlier speakers. Diagrams are useful. The digitalization might help, but if it can't be simplified, then I'd be comfortable with the task force wherever they end up.
Thank you. Chun-Li?
Same with majority. I like diagram. It is difficult to follow. If there's a way to simplify it, please do it. Otherwise, happy to remove it. Thanks.
Okay, Lynn, the strong weight of opinion is to allow the task force to have a go on simplifying this a little bit. You got one example from South Africa. I don't know if you have other examples as well. I note Rich's concern that this may not be possible. You may land where Rich is, but clearly most of the board members would like you to have a go and give the task force some discretion in deciding this.
Okay, thanks very much for that. It sounds to me like the board's very similar to where the task force is. We've got lots of options and we just have to find one that's going to work. So thank you for that. The next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is probably one of the most difficult parts of the feedback that we received, and that was the very mixed views we got on Supplement A. Whilst and we only asked for people to, if they wanted to, give us comments on this. So by no means did everybody give us comments. In fact, it was less than half. On Supplement A, and I know we don't usually use numbers, but I think in this case it's important to, we had 8 that outright supported it, 9 that had some reservations, and 2 who didn't support it being published. And 24 of people didn't comment at all. It was a different situation on Supplement B, which was strongly supported, although there was, as we've already talked about, a call for further examples. and some detailed detailed suggestions. We, just to reinforce the people who didn't support it being published, because these are the only two complete negatives we had in the feedback, is the key issues they raised was it appears to be a conceptual framework like in nature, but without the systematic treatment that would enable a proper conceptual framework to be developed, and without the necessary due process, and that publishing Supplement A might risk stakeholders' expectations that concepts can be applied more widely than EER assurance engagements, or that there could be pressure on future projects because the IAASB may feel bound to do what it has previously approved. So as a result of those views, and I'm going to start with Supplement B because I think it's easier. The task force's initial view is we should definitely retain Supplement B. We should add the 2 examples as already agreed with the board, and we should enhance the other examples. So my suggestion is, unless anyone has a different opinion than that, we don't concentrate this discussion on Supplement B. We actually talk about Supplement A, which is where we've got the very mixed feedback. And our initial view is there's 2 choices. We either retain or delete it, but our initial thoughts were if we retained it, no, can I just start that again? So Supplement A can either be retained or deleted, or we can retain just part 1 of Supplement A, which is a trust and credibility model. We initially thought that if we retained it, we'd only make some minor changes to it, but looking at the feedback a little bit more carefully in the time since we've posted the paper, it might be significantly more work than we initially thought, and we may not just be able to do a few edits to it. So if we move to the next slide, what we're particularly interested in here is the third question, whether or not we should retain Supplement A and publish it, and if so, do we include part 1s and part 2? There's also a technical view in question 4, and I mean, feel free to answer questions 1 and 2 if you have any comments, but I'd like to concentrate on questions 3 and 4. And question 4 is about how the cross-referencing should work. Should it be from the guidance document to the supplements, or the other way around, or vice versa? So that's the issues in front of us, and I'll now turn back to you, Tom, for comments on particularly questions 3 and 4, but also anything on 1 and 2 if people have it.
Okay, thank you, Lynn, for setting that up for us. Rich.
Tom, I'd like to come in first and then think about my other things, but I had one clarification question. Lynn, when you said post the posting, you've determined that there'd be maybe more changes to Supplement A than just some minor changes. Was that focused on section 1, section 2, or evenly between section 1 and 2?
I'll let Pauline correct me if I'm incorrect there. It's more in section 2 where Paulina's nodding. It's more in section 2 where people have got more substantive comments than just edits. And when we looked at them more carefully, we went, we might actually have to think about these more deeply. So it's part 2, which is all the stuff we took out of the guidance.
Thank you. So Rich, you want to come back in later, probably. Okay, Fiona.
Thanks, Tom. In terms of whether we, look, again, I don't have a strong view. What I do think, though, is a lot of effort has gone into that supplement, and I think there is a lot of material in there that is very helpful. Clearly, you have to take heed from all of the comments that you've received, and you did receive a lot of comments, or we did receive a lot of comments on this. Not keen to necessarily see a massive amount of expansion or additional information. I'm wondering whether or not we could treat it as an educational enabler, so carve it out and have it as a separate piece that people could dip into if they really wanted to, but it's not necessarily part of the body of the document. So don't position it as an appendix. And in terms of cross-referencing, I guess the answer to the second question is heavily dependent on your answer to the first one. But either way, I mean, if the vote for the board is to keep it, then preference is not to cross-refer from the guidance to the supplement. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Josephine? It's a bad connection, Josephine. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Kaiue?
Thanks, Tom. I have two comments. The first one relates to paragraph 73 in relation to supplement A. For the reasons noted in paragraphs 69 and 70, and the large number of serious technical issues that I have seen were identified in a number of comment letters on supplement A. I believe that supplement A should not be issued at this time. Seeking to issue supplement A would also run counter to the drive by the task force to replace conceptual material with shorter practical examples. My second comment relates to paragraph 79. There I agree with the task force proposal for supplement B. However, the task force also needs to consider instances how have been identified in the comment letters where examples are not in line with IAASB 3000. I would not be in favor of having a reference from the guidance to the supplements, since this would elevate the supplements into having the same authority as the guidance. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Kai. Josephine, do you want to try again?
Yeah. Any better?
Yes.
Okay. Right. I really liked supplement A. I thought that was very, very important and useful material. I like the idea that Fiona says that potentially it could be carved out, particularly if you find that scrubbing part 2 means that it's actually reduced it quite a bit. So, but my overarching comment here is that I would like it to be retained, and I'm not too fussed about the cross-referencing, but I guess I think of the guidance a little bit like the standards, and therefore I would cross-reference from the supplement to the guidance and not the other way around. Not that I am saying they are standards, just to be clear. I can see Rich staring at me.
Hey, Eric.
Thanks, Tom. So our consultations indicated quite a bit of support for supplement A. This came from preparers, users, and practitioners. So, you know, going into this meeting, I was certainly in favor of retaining it. I'm now a little bit scared based on what Lynn has just said about the amount of work that it might take. But if there are some ways of dealing with that in a simplified manner, then certainly support keeping it. It seems like our stakeholders, or the ones that we spoke to, certainly are in favor of keeping it.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Rich.
Thanks, Tom. So maybe first on the referencing, I agree with where the others seem to be coming out. I would not reference from the guidance to the supplements, but from the supplements up to the guidance would be okay. On supplement A, I would very much want to delete section 2. I've always been nervous about it. I always worry about the content having a much wider scope than just this standard, this guidance. It would go across, and people would be looking at this for other parts of the ISAs and related standards. So to me, delete, but I would want to keep section 1. I think section 1 is good, has a lot of educational value, I think. Supplement B, very much support the examples. The one thing I would say though is, again, where time is important, and therefore if we spend time on all these other things that we're going to do, and to expand the examples, I'm just worried about spending the time and not getting the standard out or the guidance out as you guys want to get out in March. And so I could easily see the examples just being added later, so that not to mess up the timing. But like supplement B, don't like section 2 of supplement A. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Charlie?
I'm with most of the colleagues who have spoken. I personally find a lot of helpful information in sub A, and going through the comments, I think there are quite a bit of support. There are a lot of people who actually like the content there. So like most of the colleagues, I think if you can retain the information in some way, to me, it is guidance to a guidance. So if we can somehow position it properly, then it will be great to retain the information. I've also heard, like Eric, from preparers who actually find it useful as well. So that will be my stance.
Thank you. So one of the things I think we need to distinguish, like I see people are in general supportive of retaining supplement A in some regard. However, there was the question about part 1 and 2 as well, which if you, in the further comments, if you have a preference for retention, please also say, do you think we should also retain both parts of supplement A as well? We'll probably have to come back to some type of straw poll to get some guidance. Susan wants to come in on behalf of Len. Len's having real connectivity problems tonight. So, Susan?
Hi, everybody. Len apologizes for the fact that he's having all of these connectivity issues. He supports both supplements A and B, and also parts 1 and 2 of supplement A. He thinks there's a lot of very useful guidance in those supplements, and they should be retained. As for the cross-referencing between the guidance document and supplement B, I suppose I would prefer we haven't talked about that, but I would prefer to reference from the supplement to the guidance document under the assumption that the guidance document has more authority. But I'm a little concerned about the statement that we think that the guidance document has more authority, because I'm not really sure where that authority comes from. It was my impression that it was always supposed to be a non-authoritative document. So, but in the absence of doubt, I would prefer to reference from the supplement to the guidance.
Susan, one is non-authoritative and one is, I really mean it's non-authoritative guidance.
Yeah, and that's
it's like double secret probation.
Yeah. Those kinds of secret levels of authority are a little bit concerning to me.
No, in this case, lack of authority. We really
Right.
need it doesn't have any authority.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the specificity there on behalf of Len. Julie?
Thanks. For supplement A, we had very strong support for part 1, Lynn. I think I'm not a strong support for part 2, but definitely not probably in the camp of deleting it altogether. So if there's something you could do with part 2, I think it's still valuable. On the cross-referencing, I'm sort of where Susan was. I was a little confused about the greater authority point, but our users of this document definitely thought cross-referencing to some degree would be helpful. So whatever you think is best, Lynn, but they did think some cross-referencing, whichever way we decide is the best way to go about it, would be very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Sue?
Thanks. In the outreach I did, I had a mixed response around Appendix A, so that's not terribly helpful. My personal preference is to retain, especially part 1. Less concerned about part 2. I like the educational material suggestion that Fiona made. In terms of cross-referencing, I actually had a similar comment to Susan around the authoritative, non-authoritative piece. I actually feel that cross-referencing both ways is the helpful angle that we're trying to achieve through providing guidance of whatever status. Thanks.
Okay. Isabel?
Hello, good evening, everybody. I agree to keep part 1 of Appendix A, less support for part 2, but if the task force wants to keep it, that's fine. Regarding the cross-referencing or the referencing, I agree with many, like Josephine, Kai-Uwe, and Rich, that we should reference, but not cross-reference. So we should reference from the supplement to the guidance, but not from the guidance to the supplement for the reasons that have been already expressed. However, yesterday I started by speaking about the urgency of having the guidance out, not too late because of all the projects ongoing, especially in Europe. So if fine-tuning the supplement may postpone the issuance of the final guidance, it would be really a pity because we would miss a lot of content that has been built over the last year. And if there's a possibility to split the project and have the supplements later, I know it's difficult because we have the funding that will end at the end of the year and we will have less staff support. But for me, the focus should be on the guidance. And if we can have the supplements, fine, but it should not be the priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I agree. I think with most people, I'd like to see supplement A retained. I think some of the outreach that we've had indicates that there seems to be a bit of a mystery around attestation engagements in general, and particularly these types of subject matters. And supplement A is actually, I think Fiona referenced, an educational piece. It certainly helps, I think, in understanding guidance. We'd support retaining both sections 1 and 2, acknowledging that perhaps section 2 might need some work, as Lynn pointed out, but we think it's good to be there. And with respect to referencing, I say the more referencing, the better. I don't see how you can, as you said, elevate something beyond non-authoritative. It's not possible. So I think that as much as we can do would be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Morton, you're connected. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you. I guess Len wasn't the only one having issues connecting this afternoon. On the supplements, similar to others, I would like to retain supplement A and part 1 at least. But similar views to Isabel, and as I expressed earlier, that I think it's more urgent to get the guidance out and that the supplements may come at a later stage. So if they would delay the release of the guide itself, I would not do that yet and then keep that for later. On the cross-referencing, I would go with the flow from the task force taking decide what's best for that.
Thank you. Okay, that's the last of the hands. So at the very least, there seems to be the strong weight of opinion for keeping some of supplement A, particularly part 1. There seems to be some mixed view, but largely supportive of part 2, but not all, Len. And some people feel strongly about, a couple people felt strongly about not including it. You did say that this task force would need to do some work on the second part. We also have this general caution about the ability to move quickly. And so I think the task force a little bit will have to balance out and almost think about whether it's worth bringing it back or not. I didn't see like the weight of opinion that said no to push it ahead with part 2 though. So I guess in that, you know, it's almost some judgment held up that people think it could go out with just part 1 and part 2 at some form at a later date, but sort of wait and see where the task force lands on this. That was my read of the discussion, but you may have a slightly different take of it.
Yeah, I've sort of from that discussion in my head got a hierarchy and it is around getting the guidance out in a timely manner. And my hierarchy is concentrate first on the guidance document, secondly on supplement B, thirdly on part 1 of supplement A, and the final one is part 2 of supplement A. And I think the task force just needs to reserve the right to come back to you on the second part of supplement A and say, we actually can't do this within the time, and it may be something that we're going to have to give to IAASB staff to do rather than being able to do it at present. So we'll do our best, but yeah, part 2 of supplement B, if it becomes educational material and is carved off, may not go through with this whole process. So yeah, a little bit, and the cross-referencing is relatively clear from people to go from supplements up to the guidance rather than the other way around. So that's useful. That's the approach we'll take. But yeah, the outstanding issue for me still is how much work we have to do to get supplement A part 2 into a state that we can comfortably and appropriately vote it out. But Billy's probably got some comments.
Yeah, and if you go, I didn't hear that if you went down that path and weren't able to finish part 2 of supplement A in an acceptable form, that people would view that as a fatal flaw at all. In fact, it would come to this new triple secret non-authoritative guidance in our new non-authoritative guidance hierarchy, maybe. But I felt like that your summation would make the board happy based upon what I heard. Philly?
Thank you, Tom. I fully agree with Lynn's hierarchy that she set out. I think that's fine. I just wanted to remind the board as well that leading up to the approval of the consultation document, remember we've applied a rationale throughout this project and certainly from around middle of last year, to sort of draw a distinction between the guidance document and the supplements. And I think that has been reinforced through the discussion now as well. We must also just remember, if we think through to the final approval of what we're developing, it is the guidance document that will be voted in plenary session. The supplements are distinct from the guidance document, and they will go through a separate process, just like we did for the approval of the consultation document. You will remember that we voted on it in the December meeting, but the supplements were actually cleared through that negative clearance channel of ours. And it will be the same way to do this. So there's every possibility that the way to manage this is to detach the supplements from the guidance document. And I would, based on the discussion that we've just had, say that we should probably consider completing the guidance document, and then we publish 3 separate documents as and when they are ready. And I would see, as Lynn has said, the examples as being the first of those, and then part 1 of section 2, and then part 2 of section 2, with the caveat that we need to see how much work that will entail, taking into account that we only have the resource, Pauline as a resource, until the end of the year, and then if it has to go back to staff, we just need to look at priorities and where what fits in. So I think it's a good approach that we can detach these things and focus on the priority, but not lose anything. And as we go along, we can then put those separate documents through our non-authoritative approval channel.
Tom, can I just comment on that? Vili, I completely agree with you. I just think it's really important, given the feedback we've got, that the guidance and supplement B go out together, because that's the one that people have been really, really excited about. So,
yes,
in terms of our effort, and somebody might be able to go back through the records, but I think actually we have approved part 1 of supplement A somewhere before to be published. So that might be the answer, that one's actually done and dusted, and we just keep coming back to supplement A part 2. We'll do our very best now to have a look at it and work out how much work. But I think we've got all the guidance we need at this point in time in terms of that. So thank you all very much.
Lynn, and maybe just to come back on that, yes, I certainly agree that I'm not implying that there necessarily needs to be a separation of time, especially when it comes to supplement B and part 1, just like we did with the publishing of the public consultation, where these documents did go out at the same time. So I fully agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think you got some clear guidance there as well, based upon that. And since no one really raised, there were 1 or 2 points beyond just the supplement question, assumed by 1 and 2, people were content with where the task force has landed. So, Lynn, I turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. And if we can move on to slide 12, please. And because we've got time, the questions are actually coming after 6 chapters. And I think I might take the 6 chapters because we're looking for high-level feedback at this point in time. In terms of the introduction, the main theme we heard around the introduction was around referencing and consistency. Diagram 1 didn't draw a lot of comments, and so we don't intend to do very much with diagram 1. In terms of, and it is more technical, I've already talked about the fact that we've now included the name of the standard and the guidance, and I think that's absolutely sensible, and we should have done it before. And we've also got feedback that people didn't like the S and Gs, so we're replacing them with paragraph numbers throughout. So the introduction is more at a technical consistency level. On chapter 1, people were asking for some clarification on when the work of an expert might be needed and further guidance on what would be useful on how to evaluate the competence, capabilities and objectivity of those experts. We propose clarifying that it's a matter of judgment when to use the work of experts, but that the level of assurance or whether the subject matter is financial or non-financial are not drivers of the need for an expert. It's about the nature and complexity of the underlying subject matter and its evaluation and measurement. This could be illustrated potentially in one of the Supplement B new examples, and we could also include objectivity in that. In terms of chapter 2, we've already talked about our need to make that chapter more EER specific and include some smaller examples in that. There was a bit of mixed feedback on the use of the icons, but overall we think we'll retain those. And we'll certainly take on board the comments around diagram 4 of breaking it up and making sure that the text flows from it. In terms of chapter 3, the themes are on the slide, and what we propose to do is have 1 or 2 short examples on structuring on pre-acceptance or readiness assessment. We're going to look at the wording of the guidance to make sure that we're not going over and above the requirements of the standard. And we will clarify the rolling program is driven by user needs rather than just cost considerations. There were a couple of calls also of the need for a stand back, and we haven't yet assessed that matter. So those are the first 4 chapters. As I'm talking through them, I'm actually changing my mind. I think we might just take questions now on that, because 4 chapters is actually quite a lot to take comments. So I might leave the next 3 and ask people if we can go to slide 14, and if you can just give us high-level comments on the introduction and chapters 1 to 3. I'll do 4 to 6 separately.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Fiona, through chapter 3.
Thanks, Lynn. And I can probably cover off all of the chapters in this overarching comment. Certainly didn't have any fatal flaws with anything. I have separately provided a limited number of more detailed comments. If you want even more detail, I can give that to you, but I certainly hadn't intended on providing those. I think you're in the right direction, and I'd leave it up to the task force to make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Josephine?
And thank you. I'm extremely comfortable with the task force proposals. Just a little reminder of what I mentioned yesterday about that stand back comment, and just if you could actually give that attention, I'd appreciate it. But other than that, really happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
And I'm there as well. Lynn, I think answer question 1, yes. Question 2, yes. I think I just throw my support behind your task force view that the clarity on that rolling program will be important, because that came up through our discussions. And I don't have anything else for question 3 as it relates to 1 to 3.
Thank you. Imran?
Yes, in respect of chapter 2, really supportive of the suggestions and tweaks that the task force is thinking about in respect of professional skepticism, professional judgment. And in chapter 3, the idea that isn't fully developed yet in relation to the stand back, I support the idea. I think it's a really good idea to develop, particularly in relation to the question of the rational purpose for the engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Eric?
Thought I'd lost my voice for a minute there. Generally supportive of the direction on the various chapters. I think one of the areas that we were struggling with, that we're not sure how you're going to deal with, is just the use of the terms EER report and EER information. We had a lot of confusion around that and what was being considered throughout the document. So we thought the introduction could deal with that at some point. And still supportive of diagram 4, although we agree it needs some work. And otherwise supportive of where the task force is heading on 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Kayuwe?
Thanks. First of all, I have general comments to the guidance. I have seen a number of comment letters, and in particular, the IDV comment letter. They indicate that there are still a large number of instances in which the concepts of wording in the guidance are not in line with IAASB 3000. Go beyond IAASB 3000 in an inappropriate manner, make technical questionable assertions, or is internally inconsistent. I recommend that the task force look at these matters that have been identified in these comment letters very closely to ensure that these matters are appropriately resolved prior to the provision of the next draft to the board. My team, Wolf, as you know, has been involved when IAASB 3000 was first written and was on the IAASB 3000 task force when it was revised, and he has indicated to me that he would be pleased to be of assistance in this matter. In total, I can say on the introduction, chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, I agree with the task force view, subject to the general comments on the guidance I have made. Thanks.
Thank you, Kai. Kai Morton.
Thank you. Generally very comfortable with where the task force is heading. I think you've identified the issues that I've seen in the consultation papers, and that the views that you're presenting are going in the right direction. So very comfortable in where we're heading on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Sue?
Thank you. Thanks. I'm also supportive of where the task force is going. I think particularly being focused on what relates to EER specifically, rather than including general material, and drawing a link very strongly with 3000. We've got some detailed comments which I can send through separately for the task force consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Susan Jones for Len.
Yes, thank you. Len compliments you, Lynn, and the task force. He believes that the document has come a very long way since its early drafts, and it provides very helpful guidance. He doesn't have any significant comments on the document, and that's going to cover off chapters 1 to 12 for Len. He will send detailed comments to the task force offline, and he encourages the issuance of the guidance quickly because it is so very helpful.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, that's all the hands. So lots of compliments, Lynn.
That's good. Just a couple of points I'd like to pick up. The shorthand I used, there are a raft of consistency problems, and Eric's consistency comments and Eric's point about EER reporting and information is included in that, as is Kaiui's consistency with 3,000. So we're definitely taking both of those concepts on board. And thanks, Kaiui. We will get back to Wolf. He has, the German response has given us a lot of detailed comments around that consistency, and we'll certainly be taking most of those on board. And I think, and Julie, on the rolling program, yes, that clarity will be important. So I think those were the specific comments, which is good. So if we now move back a slide and talk about 4 to 6. Okay, one of the things we have done in the guidance is we haven't been precise in our use of the word criteria, and we have used it in different contexts in different ways. And what we need to do is go back and look in this chapter, but also in chapter 6, about whether we've used it, one, consistently with the standard, but secondly, consistently between the chapters. So that will be a matter that we need to go through and just make sure that we have got it consistent. There is also comments about the importance of specifying criteria for disclosure and presentation, and a comment in terms of we haven't got much on completeness in the chapter, so we'll look at that. The major issues in chapter 5 are around technology, and us including some information on technology. What we intend to do is add a paragraph, but not extensive guidance, because the testing of controls is consistent, whatever kind of material you're assuring. There was also a point around the importance of elevating governance and oversight in this area, and weaknesses that are often in entity systems in terms of the control system working below governance and oversight. And so emphasising that is important, and a omission, in people's opinion, that we haven't provided enough guidance on evaluating external sources of information. And as those of us who have done work in this area know, there is often a large amount of third-party sourced information. So we will add that in. So we have accepted all of those comments as sensible things to do. In chapter 6, it's been an ongoing issue about whether we are concentrating enough on practitioners rather than preparers. And we're still committed to having both in, but trying to emphasise even more the practitioner. I've already talked about criteria, and we have also got a number of comments around double materiality. I have to say that's something we haven't actually considered in any detail at present, but it seems that paragraphs 244 to 246 will need some clarification. I think, and paragraph 8, we will, diagram 8, we'll have another look at it, but I note that the views were relatively mixed on that. So with that, I will ask to move to the next slide and for any high-level comments on chapters 4 to 6.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. I knew some of you had comments that span the whole 1 through 12 in terms of chapters, but so those were taken as already. But if anyone wants to have comments specifically at 4 to 6 right now, please come forward. Kaiua.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I will start subject to my general comments on the guidance. I agree with the task force view on chapters 4, 5, and 6 with the following additional comment on chapter 6. On this chapter 6, the guidance also needs to be consistent throughout the chapter in its treatment, distinguishing between, firstly, the practitioner's consideration of the process to develop the criteria for identified reporting topics, and secondly, the practitioner's consideration of whether the resulting criteria were appropriately applied to identified reporting topics. That's all. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Imran?
Yes, so I've got one comment and it relates to chapter 5 and the task force's analysis of this issue of the testing of controls. So the task force is of the view that the testing of the controls, whether they're IT or otherwise, over the preparation of ER information is no different than testing of controls of financial information. Yet in paragraph 142 of the same document, the task force kind of gives credit to the possibility that in this environment, internal controls are less developed. And I think that's the marketplace experience of it and the reluctance to undertake these engagements. And so I'd give a greater emphasis to 142 than I would to 141. And coupled to this idea, Lynn, that actually the expertise in testing some of these controls may be a different expertise to the expertise in testing an IT, a financial control. So the expertise in relation to work done on an estimate may be different to the variety of kinds of information that may be part of an EER report and what those controls would entail. So that's the primary distinction I was trying to make in this batch of paragraphs. That's the only point. Thank you.
Thank you. See no other hands raised. Len, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think those are both useful comments, and we've got in terms of chapter 6, we've certainly got some very detailed comments on that, and that will be useful in terms of dealing with Kaiui's issues. Imran, I think it's a really good point, particularly about the expertise needed in terms of the IT controls, and we need to run a thread between the capability, competency and capability chapter and this chapter in terms of that. So we'll add that, and yeah, and obviously we need to address your inconsistency we've got at this point in time. So we'll do that as well. So that's really good.
Great. I think we can move on.
We're making wonderful progress. Thank you all very much. Chapter 7 is a chapter on assertions, and because we're making so much progress, I am going to take all the rest of the chapters and then open it up for final comment. So you can expect to listen to me for a few minutes. The chapter on assertions was generally supported, but there were some themes that arose. One was to simplify the language, and we proposed to do that. The second was to align it with 3410 and 315. And we think this is already the case, but just in case, we will have another look through that to check that we have got it right. And I guess in a nutshell, because of the our assessment of where it's at, we don't intend to do anything particularly significant in terms of Chapter 7, given the overall support we've got, except to add a practical example for each assertion, because it is fair to say that we have set out about the assertions. We haven't necessarily made that as clear in terms of examples as we possibly could. The calls that have been made, and it comes up here particularly, to move some of the content to Supplement A, or to move back from Supplement A to the guidance. In general, we don't think we'll be doing that. We believe that what's in Supplement A should stay there, and we don't want to move between the two. It's obviously not set in stone, but something that we will look at. There was also some comments that assertions maybe didn't need to be here, as it was one of the 10 challenges. We believe that it must be there. Chapter 8, we have talked about the major theme here already, which is the limited and reasonable assurance theme. A lot of the discussion in this area was also around the types of procedures like analytical reviews or compliance testing, etc., that people would like more guidance on. Now, I put this in the category of the evolving in the future. This wasn't one of the challenges, and therefore it's outside our terms of reference. That's going to be of concern to people, because they, in the lapse time between identifying the challenges and this work, people have decided there are some challenges here that they would like more guidance on. We won't be doing that because it is outside our terms of reference. There were calls once again to make some things more specific on EER, a general theme, and some particular paragraphs to make the material less dense and easy to read. On performance materiality, some people wanted it shifted to Chapter 9 with all the rest of the materiality issues. We're not proposing to do that. We think it appropriately sits in the evidence area, because it is around about designing and performing procedures. Chapter 9 is, and the issues are all in that bar there and in the issues paper, so I'm not going to focus on what the issues are. What I am going to talk about is what we're going to do about them. And we intend to make a more explicit linkage to the earlier chapters on intended users and the purpose of EER reports when evaluating misstatements. We intend to, there was call for more information on intended users. We don't intend to put an awful lot more in because we've counted through the guidance, we've got 180 references already to intended users. So rather than making new guidance, we think the answer is linking the information we have. And we're also going to look once again at diagram 10 and new supplement B. Moving on to the next slide. The feedback we got here was about who the actual address E was and the linkages to 3000 on that. A call for some guidance on emphasis of matter and more illustration of the report. What we are considering doing is actually a reasonably significant rewrite of this chapter based on an audit report, an assurance report, and flowing the information from there. We also intend to include some wording and some examples of emphasis of matter and help people a little bit more with other information. In terms of chapter 11, already remember we've already talked about not moving chapters 11 and 12 into and integrating them back into the other material, into the other chapters. They will stay separate at this point in time. The strongest call on both of these chapters was for practical examples and to make sure we are EER specific. One of the things we need to deal with here is the issue that people have raised about information where you have financial and non-financial information, which we haven't considered very carefully at this point in time, but we need to. And there's a link back to the evidence in terms of external sources of evidence. Pauline, have I missed anything important in those three chapters?
No, Lynn, I think you've covered everything.
Excellent. In that case, let's move on to the questions, which are the same as they were for the other chapters, but just more of them this time.
Okay. Julie.
Lynn, really quick, just one comment. We were probably in the camp around the assertions, feeling that might have been a little bit technical for the document, but if the task force believes they can make them EER specific or provide some context in an EER example, I think that would be really helpful. That was just the one comment I wanted to make. Otherwise, all good.
Okay.
Isabel.
Yes. If I understand well, paragraph 221 and 223, you're proposing to provide examples of report, or at least examples of paragraphs that could be included in a report. We really support that. It's really a challenge for practitioners involved in that kind of engagement to try to derive an assurance report from IAASB 3000, because as a reminder, IAASB 3000 does not have any example of report. So usually what you have to do is go to 3410 or 4420 and try to invent something based on pro forma or GAG. And it's a challenge, and it's even more a challenge for these people that are not as familiar with reporting as we are when we are auditors. So whatever we can provide on how to draft an assurance report will help. And this was raised again by many people after the consultation was closed. So that's why I wanted to raise it to you.
Thank you, Isabel. Sue Alman?
Thanks. It was just a comment on Chapter 8, which is that given the audit evidence project is moving forward, I would take the less is more approach in that area. I think a lot of the evidence issues are similar to financial statement audits. So if that can be kept at a high level, that will avoid any need to update at a later stage.
Thank you. Josephine?
I just wanted to say, Lynn, that I support all the task force proposals in this document. Thank you.
Thanks, Josephine. Imran?
Yes, I couldn't recall whether Lynn had highlighted the issue of the illustrative report, but Isabel has covered me adequately in describing my immense support for that suggestion from the task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. Lynn, just very supportive of the task force direction on all of these chapters. Just want to particularly emphasize, as Isabel has done, about the reporting chapter and working on an illustrative report. We can certainly provide some examples if they would be helpful to the task force.
Thank you.
So that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Subject to my general comments on the guidance, I agree with the task force on chapters 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, with the following additional comments and exceptions. First, to chapter 7. In my view, chapter 7 only provides one alternative in paragraph 257 to the use of assertions when there are other options available. The draft seems to suggest that practitioners either need to apply assertions or use the option provided in paragraph 257. This paragraph should clarify that there are other options to the use of assertions beyond the single one set forth in paragraph 257. Then I have one comment to chapter 8. The task force needs to be careful about the use of words like respond to the assessed risk, since such wording only applies to reasonable assurance engagements, not all limited assurance engagements. And one final comment to chapter 10. The task force needs to distinguish between an emphasis of matter in the practitioner's report on the one hand, which is covered separately in paragraphs 68, 73, and 77, and in the application material in paragraph 77 of ISA 3000, and a description of inherent limitation on measurement and evaluation, which is covered in paragraph 69 little e of ISA 3000. Furthermore, the current guidance appears to confuse stating who the intended users are in the report, and the alert required in paragraph 69 little f of the standard for situations in which the criteria are designed for special purposes. That's all. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Kai. I don't see any other hands up here. Rich got me. Rich, come on in.
I thought I had it up, but maybe you took it down and forgot to take it down. On the so I haven't commented because I thought the analysis that the task force did was really good. It's a good summary. I think the approach they have towards this is reasonably set out, and I can agree with it. The only area, and even then, it's just more I'm interested to see where we get to on the future-oriented information and the examples and how they'll support that area. But I'm happy where the task force is headed right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Okay, I did not mean to censor you, Rich. I know we talked about credits at one point in a previous meeting, but we did not implement that proposal. Lynn.
That's really helpful, and I am absolutely delighted that people like our approach to Chapter 10 and the assurance report, because we've already developed a couple of them. And so having that support is incredibly important. Thank you for that. And all the other comments we will take on board. But what I read was a lot of overall support for where the task force is heading, and importantly for our analysis of the response letters. So very much appreciate that. I wonder if before I move to the next steps, I can ask if any of the task force members have got anything that they'd like to comment on or add to the discussion to date, because you've all been very quiet. And so if any of the task force members want to say anything, very happy to hear from you now.
Roger?
Yeah, no, it's been great feedback from the board, very clear, very precise. Look forward to the people who are going to provide the task force with some information, additional information for our consideration. But it's been a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I see no other hands, Lynn, so please.
Okay, excellent. If we can have the next slide, please. Okay, where to from here? Our plan is to do the updates in the order that I talked about the hierarchy before, and we will present a full new draft to the board in December. It's really important that we get it done by then, because we only have Pauline's assistance until that point in time. And so it is vital that we do that. In terms of the digital version, we are working already with Bev and her team in terms of that, so that we write the guidance in a way that the digitalisation will be easy. and as helpful as people think it will be. So we may need to employ some additional expertise there, but at present we're comfortable with the way that that is progressing. We also will keep engaging, and it's not on the slide, with our advisory panel. There is a meeting next Tuesday night with that panel to update them on, in the same way we've just updated the board on the response letters and what we are anticipating doing. And some of those advisory panel members will help with the examples and have already offered to. So we are working towards a final approval of the guidance and whatever supplements we can get done by March 2021. So there's a lot of work to be done before then, but we have a very good task force and staff member in the form of Pauline, and we have a real desire from the users out there to get this guidance out. So we're committed to making this timetable work. So with that, Tom, can I just thank everybody for their input? We have got through this quicker than we expected by 3/4 of an hour. So that's been really, really good. And I just appreciate the time and energy, not only you've put into this, but also as board members, but also your TAs and your various reference groups or stakeholder groups that you consult. So thank you for that. And for the people who submitted comment letters, can I publicly thank you for your insights, for the knowledge that you've shared with us, and for the positive approach you've taken to providing that feedback. Thanks, Tom.
Let me echo the gratitude you expressed for all those people involved in this. And a particular thanks, Pauline. Thank you for all your work on our behalf here. I know it's been a big effort to get it done. And I would be remiss not to note Marek's role in this, even though he's out with us. But the fact that we've gotten such positive response is indicative of his efforts as well. So thank you all, and thank you for that good discussion. Now, we are early, and I promised to end you early, but if you're like me, in days where we used to be able to go to movie theaters, my favorite part was the previews. And I'm going to give you some stroll down memory lane and talk about previews right now. So tomorrow we return to ISQM 1. It's our sequel for this week. And Julie's going to give a preview of our sequel. So Julie.
Thanks, Tom. And we thought it might be helpful just to provide some clarity on one, what we plan to do tomorrow at tomorrow's session, and on the document you all received, or the gift you all received in your inbox earlier. I'll say today. For some, it might have been the day after. But so what we plan to do tomorrow in tomorrow's session is really walk through that turnaround document, and we'll explain the thinking behind the changes that we made to that. For clarity of what was in that document, almost exclusively that document were the items that had come up in the plenary session, where we'd had some discussion with board members and board members had raised comments. So you will see in that turnaround document, we have those items in there, and we have our suggested task force response, edits, what have you, in response to that. There are probably a very small number of items that are not in that document. And if you're wondering about an item you might have raised in the plenary that isn't in that document, it's because the task force did deliberate on it. Don't fear, we talked about it, but we hadn't proposed a change. So in either of those camps, if there's something in the turnaround document where we've changed it or edited it and you have a concern, or something that wasn't in that turnaround document that you'd still want to discuss, that should be raised tomorrow at the meeting so that we can have a discussion around it and that the task force has direction on how to move forward with those items. There's also some sections that you would notice were missing out of that turnaround document, and those sections were areas where we might have gotten offline comments, but we felt that they didn't need to make their way into the turnaround document. So you'll see those in a subsequent draft, but we didn't think those were necessary to come to the meeting tomorrow. And then I guess lastly, if there are editorial comments you would have noted in the email request earlier, we would like to have those, if possible, before the session tomorrow morning. We are going to be dealing with probably quite a bit of content to get through as a task force in the next little while. So we will definitely take comments, but if you could get them in before 7, that would be ideal so that we can consider those afterwards. It's just a bit of a challenge to consider all of the editorials that come in. So Tom, I think I've summarized it. I'll ask Natalie if I've missed anything, but basically that's what we're planning on doing. We're focusing on that document you would have seen come through your email this morning and working through that in our session tomorrow morning. Natalie, did I miss anything on that summary? Maybe Natalie's not on the call. Willie, did I miss anything?
No, Julia, I think you've covered everything. And I think Natalie is actually busy with
yes, sorry. Yes.
The document, yes.
I'm used to her being there.
So the other thing I'd say is if I get this right, really tomorrow will be, if you have major issues still to raise, tomorrow's the opportunity. We don't want to be surprised going into next week when we're trying to approve the draft. So sort of last call on major substantive issues is tomorrow. Is that correct, Julie? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I did it. I was remiss on this. Marcus and Jim, if you have any thoughts based upon the discussion on EER or now on IAASB, feel free to jump in here.
Thanks, Tom. I think the only comment I have relates to the discussion on the graphic. It took me a long time to understand what the graphic was saying, and so if that's the case, then it's not serving its purpose. So I might be in the camp of removal.
Yeah. Okay. Marcus.
Yeah, I would agree with Jim on this point. If a graphic is not clear, I would leave it out. But if it can be improved, fine with me. But apart from that, I have no comments. Thank you.
Okay. We've had a lot of important discussions this week already, but we have some big ones coming up on QM. And both 1, 2, and I said 220 this week. And so I just wanted to afford people the opportunity, if they have a comment to say about upcoming events for us, to come in here. Any questions from a logistical standpoint? Okay, good, really well done to the EER task force. So thank you for that. I think I should let people sign off now. Many of you could use the rest. Many of you could start your days if you are in a different part of the world, and you may need to refill on coffees. And some of us are gonna go see our children right now, or the one that's sitting outside the door. So have a great rest of the day wherever you are, and I'll speak to you 7 a.m. tomorrow, right? My time.
Right.
And we're going to approve minutes, my favorite topic tomorrow. So